This is an English paper which could help students preparing for grammar school exams or in general who want to improve their reading comprehension and creative writing. The paper is designed such that it has a reading comprehension with multiple choice questions. In addition, there are answers as well as hints to help students find what the right answer might be. Followed by comprehension, there are other sections like writing tasks, where students can try to write, uh, some stories or essays or diary entries. There are hints on how to approach writing exercises or creative writing exercises. There is space provided to do some work, and for each of the prompts provided above, there is a there are some hints on how the students could go about creating their stories or finishing the creative writing work. At the After the creative writing section, there's another section for questions and answers. So rather than multiple choice questions, students are asked to create or write answers using their own words, and followed by that, there are hints on what the possible answers could be for those questions. And in the end, at the very end, there are words which students can uh, which students can read to improve their vocabulary. So the purpose of this paper is to help students cover all the different aspects of English comprehension and creative writing. So let me just show you how. Let me just try to do the comprehension exercise, and and show how the answers work and how the hints help with the answers. So the comprehension is: Mr. Fisher remembered a time, surely not so long ago, when books were golden, when imaginations soared, when the world was filled with stories which ran like gazelles and bounced like tigers and exploded like rockets, illuminating minds and hearts. He had seen it happen, had seen whole classes swept away in the fever. In those days, there were heroes, there were dragons and dinosaurs, there were space adventures and soldiers of fortune and giant apes. In those days, thought Mr. Fisher, we dreamed in color, though films were in black and white and good always triumphed in the end. Now everything was in black and white, and though Mr. Fisher continued to teach with as much devotion to duty as he had 40 years before, he was secretly aware that his voice had begun to lack conviction. To these boys, these sullen boys with their gelled hair and perfect teeth, everything was boring. Shakespeare was boring, Dickens was boring. There didn't seem to be a single story left in the world that they hadn't heard before. And over the years, though he had tried to stop it, a terrible disillusionment had crept over Mr. Fisher, who had once dreamed so fiercely of writing stories of his own. They had come to the end of the seam, he understood. There were no more stories to be written, the magic had run out. This was an uncharacteristically gloomy train of thought, and Mr. Fisher pushed it away. Not all his boys lacked imagination. Alistair Tibbet, for instance, even though he had obviously done part of his homework on the bus, an amiable boy, this Tibbet, not a brilliant scholar by any means, but there was a spark in him which deserved attention. Mr. Fisher took a deep breath and looked down at Tibbet's exercise book, trying not to think of the snow outside and the 5 o'clock bus he was now almost certain to miss. 4 books to go, he told himself, and then home, dinner, bed, the comforting small routine of a winter weekend. But gradually, sitting there in the warm classroom with the smell of chalk and floor polish in his nostrils, Mr. Fisher began to experience a very strange sensation. It began as a tightening in his diaphragm, as if a long unused muscle had been brought into action. His breathing quickened, stopped, and quickened again. He began to sweat, and when he reached the end of the story, Mr. Fisher put down his red pen and went back to the beginning, rereading every word very slowly and with meticulous care. This must be what a prospector feels when, discouraged and bankrupt and ready to go home, He takes off his boot and shakes out a nugget of gold the size of his fist. He read it again, critically this time, marking off the paragraphs with notes in red. A hope which at first Mr. Fisher had hardly dared to formulate swelled in him and grew strong. He found himself beginning to smile. If anyone had asked him what Tibet's story was about, Mr. Fisher might have been hard put to reply. There were themes he recognized, elements of plot which were vaguely familiar: an adventure, a quest, a child, a man. But to explain Tibet's story in these terms was as meaningless as trying to describe a loved one's face in terms of nose, eyes, and mouth. Nose, eyes, mouth. This was something new, something entirely original. So the way I recommend you can approach this passage is you can write notes somewhere, let's say on the right margin, about what that paragraph is about. So first paragraph, for example, talks about a teacher and who is trying to explain how the stories were at the beginning, how the stories used to be. Then he goes to this passage, and the second passage talks about how nowadays he finds that his students are not very interested in stories and they find them boring. The third one changes the perception and talks about a particular student, Alistair Tibbet, who seemed to have written a very interesting story. No, sorry, in the third passage, it just talks about Alistair Tibbet and that Mr. Fisher just starts to read his story, and as he reads it, uh, and he's not expecting anything great at the moment. As he reads it, he finds it so very interesting that he reads it three times, and then the passage or the passage concludes. So you can write your short notes on the right to so that you can they'll help you recollect what the passage was about. As you approach the questions, you can then think about what the right answer might be. So, what kinds? So, first question is, what kinds of stories did Mr. Fisher remember from the past? Now, if you wrote in the beginning here that this passage, the first passage paragraph was about the stories how it used to be, then you'll be able to find the answer easily here. And in the answer is somewhere here which says, in those days, that is in the past, there were stories of heroes, dragons, dinosaurs, space adventurers, soldiers, giant apes. So that answer would then be answer B. The next one, how does Mr. Fisher feel about his current students? Now, again, if you wrote the notes on the short summary of the paragraphs on the right, that should be a paragraph number 2, where somewhere over here it says that everything was boring for the students. So if we look at the options, how does Mr. Fisher feel about his current students? He thinks he finds them exciting. That's not the case. He thinks they're all brilliant scholars. The passage does not talk about anything about the students being brilliant. He feels they lack imagination and they find everything boring. This is a possible answer, but let's always make sure that you read all the answers. And then the last one is he believes they are more imaginative than the students he used to teach. That is not mentioned in the passage either. So C seems to be the right answer. So you can go through all these multiple choice questions, and just remember that you go through all the questions, or sorry, all the options before picking the best option. The answers are provided after the questions, and there are also hints. For example, we did not do question 4, so let's see what the question 4 was. If you're stuck, what does Mr. Fisher think about his own teaching now? The options are: he thinks he's more enthusiastic than ever, he believes his voice lacks conviction, he feels he's better than other teachers, he thinks he's too strict. If you're not sure, then let's see what the hint says. Pay attention to Mr. Fisher's thoughts about his own teaching, particularly how he describes his voice. So where does it? Let's go to the paragraph where it talks about how Mr. Fisherman thinks. Let's see if the find is here. Now everything was in black and white, and though Mr. Fisher continued to teach with as much devotion to duty as he had 40 years ago, he was secretly aware that his voice had begun to lack conviction. So the hint tells us that we should pay attention to what her thoughts are about his teaching, particularly how he describes his voice. And over here, the mention of voice is here in the second paragraph, where it says that his voice had begun to lack conviction. So while he's teaching the same way, but he feels that he is not as his style is he does not the students don't find the way he's teaching that convincing, or they don't believe uh, as the previous students used to. So if I look at question 4, then this one which says he believes his voice lacks conviction, that's the right answer. So hopefully you can see that hints help you think about the hints guide you how to think about a specific question and the answer, and then pick the best option. After the comprehension exercise, there's a writing exercise, which is a story, an essay, a letter, or a diary entry. And I have provided some prompts what you can write about. And then there are hints. For example, the common theme is you need to first figure out what you're writing about and what is the style. So, for example, if it's a story, then you can be creative about it. So the first, and what the topic should be. So the topic of the story is write a story that Tibbet could have written, which moved Mr. Fisher. So you want to be creative here. You want to write a story which you think Tibbet would have written, and then it has to touch a teacher's heart and reignite their passion for teaching. So create a spider diagram with the center of the spider as what is the main theme of the story, and the legs should be the different points you want to write about the story. So, for instance, if you're writing a story, the center could be Tibbet's story, what the story will be about, and the legs could be different elements of the story, such as settings, scene setting, characters, plot, climax, and then you can develop each of those legs. Then you have your writing separated into paragraphs with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Incorporate literary devices. For example, instead of keeping simple words like Mr. Fisher was happy, try to see how you can describe this in a more enthusiastic way using similes. So Mr. Fisher was as happy as a lark. That gives you that shows that he was not just happy but a lot more happier. Then you use vocabulary. So instead of using said, you can use the word exclaimed, whispered. So different styles of words, and always read what you have written. So you have a space provided here, use that. And then there are examples. For example, the first one, write a story about that Tibbet could have written, which moved Mr. Fisher. And you have to include elements which could touch a teacher's heart and reignite their passion for teaching. Now, because it's a story, it's a fictional piece of work, so you can be creative. And the spider theme could be the center will be the story to move Mr. Fisher, and the legs will have an introduction, characters, conflict, resolution, and emotional appeal. Then you can have a beginning, middle, end. So there are examples of what the story could have been like, and then you can use literary devices. And then I have provided examples for other prompts as well. And for each of the examples, I've also told you what the format should be. So if you're writing a letter, you have to address it, you have to do salutations, you have to use a body and a closing. If you have to do a diary entry, then you should have a date, a salutation, a body, a signature if you want to. So that's your writing exercise. And then another writing exercise is write for a question in your own words, provide the answer. And just like for the multiple choice questions and creative writing, there are answers provided, but use your own words. And in the end, there's a list of vocabulary words. So I hope the students will find it useful to practice their creative writing. In case you need a copy of this paper, please write the email link below. I'll be happy to provide that. Thanks so much.